Chapter 14. Final Girl. I slowly woke up with a throbbing pain in my skull. I tried reaching up to touch it and found that my hands were stuck together. No, not my hands. My wrists. They were duct taped together behind my back with that generic dollar store crap, but it was wound so tightly and so thick that it was impossible for someone with my strength to break. I looked down at my feet and saw that my legs were finishing being taped together at the ankles. The person doing it was smart, and had pulled up the bottom part of my leggings and wrapped this tape directly around the skin of my calves. I kicked and thrashed only to hear his voice. "I'm really sorry about this, Ren, but I don't have a choice," he said. "Greg?" I gasped, only that word didn't come out of my mouth. Rather, my words were muffled and reduced to hums by a solid rectangle of silver duct tape over my lips. Despite my repeated licking of the gross glued backing, I was unable to get it off, and since my hands were behind me, I couldn't pull it off either. I whined and squirmed in protest while he stupidly walked around packing a duffel bag with clothing. "Looking for this?" he asked, holding up a cell phone. It was mine, as identified by a phone cover of a white kitty with cute black eyes. He broke it by bending it and threw it in the bag. I watched in horror as he brandished a pistol and walked over to me. "I should have known that you were the same girl. I mean, what are the odds she would be my next-door neighbor? That sweet, sweet revenge would be mine any time I wanted it. And you practically threw yourself at me. But I couldn't accept. Not because you were stuck on that lame dork Raj, but because once you had found about nearly killing me as a kid, there's no telling how you would react." He pulled the tape off my mouth. I wasted no time in chastising him. "You friggin' idiot! What are you thinking? If I go missing, people are gonna look at you because you weren't in your apartment." "I don't know what's going to happen yet. I really want you to be a vegetable for a decade or so. I don't want to kill you, but that might be my only choice. And lucky for me, I've got the cash to leave the country if I decide to do that. Even an alibi for the whole thing." "You know too much." "I already texted Raj," I sneered arrogantly, "so when he gets here, he's going to beat you up." He snickered and opened up the bathroom door to show Raj laying unconscious on the floor, blood running from a wound on his temple. I made sure to make him touch everything else I used in the crime first. Not to mention I have 4 pairs of neoprene gloves on, so glove prints are unlikely. Your boyfriend even has gunpowder residue all over his hands and forearms. I tried to ruin your relationship. You went and lived your life. You chose isolation, Ren. I would have killed for a friend. A conversation. Holding hands. The things you took for granted because you were too afraid you'd hurt someone again. "How dare you?" I yelled. "You don't know the therapy I underwent just to come out of that guilt. You were lucky to even breathe after that. And besides, Raj may be my polar opposite, but I never trusted him more in my life. I never trusted you." "Ironic, isn't it?" He chuckled like a madman. "The only man you really could trust, and I managed to make him look untrustworthy. And the people you put your trust in the most really screwed you the most." "I'm really glad I didn't let you get to third base," I mused. "I don't even know what the bases are metaphors of, so I'm assuming it's oral." "So what else is in your childishly nefarious plot? Gonna force yourself on me, too?" "I literally put my DNA everywhere? Nice try, but I'm not that stupid. Besides, despite how mad I am at you that you ruined my childhood and got to live your whole life without consequence, I wouldn't ever do something so horrible." "Oh, but murder is perfectly fine," I whined in annoyance. "Massive eye roll, dickwad." He put the tape back over my mouth. "Save your last words for when we get out of town. You're going to be laying in a shallow grave in a place so remote, I'd be surprised if a hungry fly could find you." I groaned in disgust and continued to thrash to no avail. Then there was a knock at the door. He pointed at me and told me to stay quiet before putting his pistol on the desk where the broken laptop was. The door opened and I heard voices. It was Lupita. She was asking for me. "Hey," she said. "Have you seen Ren? She isn't answering her door or her phone, and we were supposed to hang out tonight." "Nope, as a matter of fact, I've been looking for her too," Craig lied in a very convincing tone. "What's with the gloves?" Lupita asked. "Deep cleaning my bathroom. Buchanan won't shut up about mold." Lupita couldn't leave. She had to know I was here. I rolled off the bed and smacked the floor hard with my face, but made my way to the wall by the window and kicked it with my bound feet until I heard the sound of Lupita trying to enter. "What was that? Ren, is that you?" "She's not here. I just told you." He sucker punched her mid-second so hard it made her stumble, but she had been punched by men his size before and won fistfights against men twice his size and height. She grabbed him by the neck, and when he tried to push her back, she used his momentum against him and Irish whipped his muscular ass into the kitchen, where he hit the counter hard enough to break the cabinets. Incapacitated for the time being, he was not able to stop Lupita from entering the room. "Ren!" she cried in relief. She began trying to free my hands, but I kept kicking my feet towards the gun, hoping she would turn and see it. "Hope I'm not too late. I gotta get you out of here and call the cops." Greg slowly began to get up. Seeing this, I grunted and thrashed again, trying to scream at her. "Hold still! I can't get the tape off if you keep moving." I was babbling under the tape so much she finally had the good sense to rip it off. "His gun is on the table, you dense heifer!" She turned around, but it was too late. Greg had her at gunpoint now and smirked. "Game over, bitch," he rasped and pulled the trigger twice. He hit her in the left shoulder and chest, and she flew over me, landing in the corner of the room. I screamed as loud as I could and began shriek-crying. He put the tape back over my mouth and carried me to his car, which had been parked with the trunk up against the door for convenience. Turning off his outside light and the light inside his apartment, he opened his trunk while I wept hysterically and struggled. But it was useless. I was thrown in hard enough to dislocate my right shoulder by landing on it with all my weight, and he shut it after I was in. "Now to make sure I get this done before Buchanan or another neighbor sees me," he said as he drove off. He even put on a black balaclava to hide his face. "I think you've made enough racket." I desperately thrashed in the trunk as the excruciating pain of my arm made every position agonizing. I tried to calm myself down just enough to think straight and remembered every trunk scene in every movie and TV show I ever saw. Frantically, I kicked the walls of the trunk hard, grateful that I still had my shoes on, and finally managed to kick out one of his tail lights, and kept turning and desperately kicked out the other one. Discovering a long, flat piece of metal I could only guess was a ruler of some sort, I grasped it with my fingertips and tried to cut or at least stretch the tape around my wrists with it. Suddenly, he slammed on the brakes hard, and metal tools flew from my hands. I slammed into the front side of the trunk hard enough to knock the wind out of my lungs. I forced my legs apart as wide as I could, and the tape around my calves stretched out enough to enable me the ability to free my legs. I managed to get on my knees and looked around. Light came in through the holes that allowed me to observe the headlights behind us. I put my hands under my butt and pulled hard to stretch the tape enough and freed my hands finally. Now with them loosened, and with the blindingly sharp pain in my right shoulder, stuck my left arm out and waved frantically at the other cars, hoping someone took this seriously and didn't think it was some sort of prank. "Please call the cops," I prayed in desperation. "Please." I peeked through the hole of the passenger side taillight, praying as hard as I could, and before we left the city limits, I saw flashing red and blues in the distance. Then I felt Greg floor it. I was dazed when my face hit the back of the trunk, and it took some doing to try and fight the inertia. He swerved erratically, and I stayed curled into a ball trying to protect my head. I knew I had at least 2 concussions and didn't want any long-term brain trauma, but at this point, a concussion would be the least of my worries. I was about to get murdered and dumped into a shallow grave if I didn't get out of here. Greg darted off onto a dirt road and into a ditch near a wooded area. There's not really a lot of deep, densely wooded land in this part of the county between Clovis and Texaco, but at night where he stopped, it was the perfect cover. Cops sped down the dirt road and kept going, losing sight of their target. "This is it," I sobbed. "I'm gonna die a virgin." He snickered. "Guess this is just as good a place as any," he said and exited the car. I now realized this was Raj's Malibu, and I had a little bit of practice with manual transmission in it, working the stick. Not the stick you're thinking of. Raj taught me manual. Greg took a shovel from the front seat and proceeded to start digging in front of the car. I felt around and pulled a lever in the trunk that lowered the back seat, allowing me to crawl out there like the story he told me about his friend's car on New Year's. I then looked around the front seat while he continued to dig and was dismayed he took the phone and gun with him. He did, however, leave the keys in the ignition, and that gave me an idea. "Screw this," I hissed. I started the engine and got his attention. He literally looked like a deer in headlights. "We both know you don't know how to work a stick, Ren." "My boyfriend does," I shot back, depressed the clutch, threw it into first, and floored it. I rammed him hard enough with the car to launch him quite a distance when I slammed on the brakes, but the car suddenly stalled and I struggled to get it to reverse so I could escape. "Why, Raj?" I spat. "Who drives a stick? What is this, the 70s? Greg stood up and I screamed in surprise. He didn't have his gun, but came to the driver's side and opened the door. I laid down in the passenger seat and kicked at him wildly while he made the effort to grab my legs. "You should know that driving a stick is fun," he yelled. I prefer walking! I screamed and kicked him in the face. It was a hard enough kick to allow me to open the passenger door and book it, but he sprinted after me and I got tackled within a few paces. I yelped in pain and desperately clawed the ground while he dragged me by my ankles to the hole he was digging. I found a pretty good-sized rock, and when his face got close enough, I clobbered him with it, knocking him down. I grabbed the shovel and proceeded to beat the crap out of him, taking all my anger of hating people out on him. I kicked his balls. I bashed his face. I screamed, "I hate you!" at the top of my lungs until he stopped moving. I kicked him one last time and ensured he was no longer moving. Guess I killed him. Good. It was in self-defense. I headed back to the car when a sharp pain in my abdomen dropped me to the ground like a sack of potatoes. I had been shot through the lower back with his .22 caliber pistol that had Raj's prints on it. Blood created a huge wet stain in my shirt that grew alarmingly fast, and the pain was indescribable. To ensure I couldn't get away, he tucked the gun in his belt, lifted and slammed me hard in the shallow grave on my back, and knelt, placing the hot barrel of the pistol between my eyes. "Any last words?" he hissed through clenched teeth. "Not the face?" I asked with a sob, trying humor in one last-ditch attempt to appeal to his humanity. At that moment, literally from out of nowhere, a Honda slammed into Raj's vehicle, startling Greg long enough for me to grab and bite his hand so hard he dropped the gun. Lupita was alive! She and Raj had smashed into the car with hers so forcefully it was totaled on impact. Those two got out of the vehicle they were in and dragged Greg away from me before beating him to within an inch of his life. "Messing with my girl, punk?" Raj yelled. I'd never been more in love with him than when Lupita backed off and let Raj savagely pummel him solo. Though Raj was not as physically powerful as Greg, Greg was too beat up to even block any of the hits. Lupita pulled me aside and applied pressure while she called for an ambulance. "Lulu, I'm sorry I called you a heifer." "It's okay, Chopstick," she returned with a smile. Chopstick, of course, was a reference to me being Asian and skinny as a twig. She'd been calling me that since the day we met, and I was cool with it, honestly. I called her Lucha in a sort of retaliation. Of course, that was a reference to her latent amateur wrestling phase. Lucha and Chopstick. When police arrived, they were stunned. Raj surrendered. Greg was screaming that he'd been assaulted, and I was delirious from blood loss. The boys went to jail, and us girls went off to the hospital in a big ambulance that nearly blinded me when it pulled up. Thanks. It took 2 weeks to even sit up thanks to the wound, and before long I could walk around with no problem. Also, my internal organs had all been missed by mere millimeters. Lupita made a full recovery. The bullets didn't exit and had to be pulled out, and they themselves were nanometers away from major blood vessels. A smidge in any direction and she would have died from blood loss in seconds. Unfortunately, my rent fell behind, and no one was informed of it. Also, Mr. Buchanan was royally pissed about his apartments being destroyed and sued for damages. Out of a place to live and with Raj's impending move back to India made me a very sad girl. The depression weighed me down to the point that I couldn't think of nothing else besides Raj. The situation was like everything else in my life. Yoshi, my apartment, my neighbor, and my self-confidence. Nothing lasts forever, and just when things seemed to be going right, I was reminded that I wasn't allowed to grow too attached to them because they would be taken away from me. All I could do was move on to the next thing that made me happy, and enjoy that as long as I could before it vanished forever also.